The champagne cork hadn't even finished rolling across the marble floor when my screen lit up. I was still in Zurich, finalizing post-deliverables for the deal I had closed, a $300 million acquisition tied up with enough strategic duct tape to keep Quantivis inflated for the next 5 fiscal years. My CEO, Doug, popped into the Zoom call like a fungus, that same smug little half grin he wears when he's about to hand someone a cupcake and call it severance. Linda, he said, voice smoother than a politician at prayer breakfast. First of all, congratulations. We couldn't have done this without you, truly. I already knew about what was coming. I could hear it in the artificial warmth of his voice, the way people talk to hospice patients they think are too drugged up to understand. But he continued with the transition complete. We're streamlining leadership. You've done your part. It's time to let the next generation take the reins. My eyes didn't blink, not once. He kept going. I've promoted my loyal team, he said. You should be proud. This is what legacy looks like. Legacy, that word hit harder than the firing. My hands were folded, my jaw tight but not trembling. I just looked into the camera and said the only thing I knew would haunt him later. Enjoy it, and I clicked leave meeting. The moment the Zoom window vanished, I didn't scream, didn't cry. I closed the laptop, the company one. The polished, access-logged, monitored-to-hell MacBook that would probably lock itself down remotely in the next 10 minutes. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the older Surface tablet, the one nobody at Quantivis knew existed. The one linked to an email address created 3 years ago. The one tied to a little consulting LLC I kept buried in the fine print of a legacy contract. That's the moment everything shifted. The moment my grief turned into precision. Before we go any further, do me a quick favor. If you're the type who's binging these stories while pretending to work, I see you. Tap that subscribe button and hit like. It helps more than you know. Keeps our little revenge department caffeinated and dangerously employed. Anyway, back to the good part. Doug didn't know it yet, but he'd just fired the person who held the kill switch to the very deal he was celebrating. Months earlier, while negotiating a contract upgrade for our largest European client, let's call them Veldstrom, I had proposed a clause to smooth things over with their increasingly agitated compliance officer. They didn't trust Quantivis's bloated org chart. Too many cooks. Too much executive turnover. They wanted a consistent, accountable party on the US end of the pipeline, so I gave them one. Under my consulting LLC, I became that party. Legally, contractually. Buried in a perfectly ordinary annex, signed off by legal during a week when our GC was on paternity leave and the temp council was drowning in and a paperwork. That clause granted Veldstrom an exclusivity agreement with Quantivis, but only if I remained the active lead on the account. The minute I was removed, reassigned, or terminated, the contract dissolved with 30 days' notice. No penalties, no legal action, just smoke. They signed it, I archived it, and no one ever read it again, until now. I tapped out a short message, just 2 words, it's time. The reply came 60 seconds later. Understood, call you in 5. Doug was too busy patting himself on the back to notice the ground crumbling under his Ferragamos. Back in the Zurich hotel room, I moved like a surgeon prepping for a quiet, sterile operation. I logged into a cloud account that hadn't been accessed in 11 months, uploaded 3 documents, opened a spreadsheet tracking every contract Quantivis had signed with a clause tied to my name. There were 6, 5 were minor, but one, Veldstrom, represented nearly 40% of the projected revenue baked into the $300M acquisition valuation. 40%. The number stared back at me from cell H29, like a loaded gun on a glass table. I didn't feel vindictive, not yet. I just felt clean. There's a kind of peace that comes when you realize your name isn't on the chopping block, it's on the blueprint. When Doug and his loyal team show up Monday to play house with their new title plates and LinkedIn updates, they're going to realize the whole structure rests on a foundation they don't own. Hell, they don't even know it exists. But Veldstrom does. And by the time the ink dries on their exit notice, the only thing left will be the silence in that boardroom. And maybe, if karma's feeling generous, the look on Doug's face when someone finally asks, who signed that clause? It started in Berlin. 3 months before Doug's little backstep fest, I was in a too-hot blazer and a rental conference room with no AC, sweating through a quarterly check-in with Veldstrom's regulatory team. They were a humorless bunch, think finance goths with color-coded binders, and their new director of compliance had the personality of a sledgehammer wrapped in liability disclaimers. Quantivis has too many intermediaries, he barked, flipping through our org chart like it was a warning label on a bad drug. We don't know who's accountable when something goes wrong. I gave him the same calm nod I reserve for TSA agents who ask me if I packed my own bag. And yet, I said, nothing has gone wrong. That didn't impress him. They were worried, rightfully so. Too many reorgs at Quantivis, too many VPs reshuffled like bad playing cards. The last guy in my role lasted 6 months. The guy before that vanished mid-integration. Some say he runs a kayak rental shack in Oregon now. Smart man. Veldstrom didn't want another nameplate and title. They wanted a person. A signature they could trust, so I made them an offer. I'd act as the legally accountable signatory for all compliance oversight and ongoing license management, but not under Quantivis's umbrella. Under mine, my personal LLC. One I'd formed years ago when I briefly consulted independently before being coaxed back into the warm fluorescent hell of full-time work. I slid the draft clause across the table. It was written to look boring, deliberately so. No flashy language. Just one key line. In the event of termination or removal of Linda Rollins from her position as primary oversight officer, this agreement may be dissolved at the sole discretion of Veldstrom AG, without penalty or recourse. Simple, clean, deadly. Their compliance director read it, then looked up and said, "This we can work with." We finalized the upgrade 2 weeks later. Legal was swamped with acquisition red lines and cross-border filings. No one blinked when I submitted my version. They were too busy printing confetti for Doug's victory parade, but I made sure to file it properly. Logged the clause, archived it twice, synced it to a secure drive linked to my LLC's tax filings, even had a notary verify the sign-off date. If Quantivis ever tried to contest it, they'd find themselves wading through a swamp of documents with my name written in ink and theirs in crayon. I didn't build that clause out of spite. I built it out of pattern recognition. Doug was the kind of leader who worshipped velocity over value. Get the deal closed, get the check. Get the press release out before anyone looked too closely. And he surrounded himself with mirrors that told him how smart he looked. No one was watching the foundation, so I planted a seed, quietly, deep, right under the roots of the most valuable client Quantivis had. It was a kill switch disguised as a formality, and the moment he cut me loose, he pulled it with his own damn hand. Back in Zurich, I stared at the message thread. Veldstrom's director of partnerships. Anton was always direct. No emojis, no wasted words. When we met for quarterly dinners, he drank gin like water and hated small talk with the fury of 1,000 suns. I typed 2 words, "It's time," hit send, then closed the app and sat very still, not from fear, from clarity. You know that feeling when you realize someone's just shown their whole hand and you're holding the ace taped under the table, that they thought I was a piece of the machine. I was the machine. I just never looked under the hood. Within minutes, Anton's reply came through, understood, confirming next steps, and just like that, Veldstrom's internal gears began to shift, quietly, efficiently, like the start of a silent evacuation. The kind where no one raises their voice but the exits start glowing red. I wasn't fantasizing about revenge. This wasn't some dramatic vengeance arc. I wasn't burning the house down. I was just reclaiming the bricks I bought and watching the roof collapse in slow motion. Doug had signed the deed with champagne on his breath. He didn't realize the ink hadn't even dried on the clause that would undo it all. And by the time his board checked the balance sheet and saw a $120 million anchor client vanish without warning, I'd be 3 steps ahead. Not running, not hiding, just flipping the lights off on my way out. Anton didn't waste time with pleasantries. He never did. The man ran Veldstrom's enterprise partnerships like a submarine captain, rigid schedule, brutal precision, and zero tolerance for dead weight. So when he answered my call on the first ring, I wasn't surprised. I was just relieved the world still had people like him in it. "You kept your word," he said without a trace of hesitation. "So will I." That was it. No follow-up, no theatrics. Not even a question about what Doug did. Anton didn't need context. He already understood the subtext. A call like mine doesn't come unless a line has been crossed. And Anton was the kind of man who, once crossed, never returned to the sidewalk. I opened my encrypted vault, retrieved the PDF titled plainly, "Termination Triggered Dissolution Agreement, Veldstrom AG," PDF, and forwarded it to his direct inbox. The form was already signed, dated, sealed. All it needed was his initials on the dotted line to initiate the 30-day wind-down of our exclusivity clause. By clause logic, it was clean. No breach. No breach because the clause had accounted for my departure in advance. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply built in a break glass in case of ego-driven stupidity feature. And wouldn't you know it, Doug tripped it like a toddler in a museum. Anton replied a few minutes later with one word, initialed. There's a distinct feeling that hits when you watch years of being overlooked crystallize into one moment of absolute leverage. It's not joy, it's not even satisfaction, it's more like gravity realigning itself, like the floor you've been standing on finally levels out under your feet. For 8 years, I'd carried that account like a quiet secret. The revenue projections, the renegotiations, international filings, they all flowed through me. And yet, when the acquisition was being finalized, Doug hadn't even invited me to the closing dinner. Said it was just a photo op for the new leadership. Instead, I got to watch him pose with the new VP of Client Strategy, an ex-frat boy named Kellen who once confused GDPR with some kind of gluten allergy. He was in the press release. I was in a holding pattern, waiting for someone to remember who kept the wheels from flying off. But Anton remembered. He always had. At last year's summit in Prague, he pulled me aside during lunch and said, "One day, Quantivis will forget what you're worth. If they do, call me first." He didn't say it like a compliment. He said it like a contingency plan. Now the switch had been flipped. while Quantivis's shiny new executive team were still nursing hangovers from their acquisition after-party. Anton's legal team was already drafting the withdrawal notice. Not a lawsuit, not a firestorm. Just a clean exit filed with cold, mechanical clarity. Clause 9.2d, subsection Roman 2. In the event that Linda Rollins is removed from project authority, Veldstrom AG may, at its discretion, terminate the exclusivity agreement with no penalty or further obligation. Doug probably hadn't read past Clause 4. Man thought exclusivity meant they owned the relationship. He never imagined it could dissolve with the removal of a single person. But it could, and it was. I watched the dashboard on my Surface as the automated legal trigger updated the status. Exclusivity terminated effective date. 30 days from receipt, the market wouldn't hear about it yet. These things take time to hit the bloodstream. But by Monday, Quantivis would wake up to a hemorrhage, and they'd have no tourniquet. Because the only person who knew where the wound was, that was me. And I'd just walked away with the bandages. I wasn't smiling. Not yet. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't some soap opera comeuppance. It was just a truth finally getting air, like justice exhaling for the first time. They thought I was a back office pawn with good manners and no teeth. Turns out I was the last thread holding their house of cards together. And I just cut it. At 8:42 a.m. Zurich time, barely after my second espresso, Quantivis's foundation began to twitch. Kellen, the shiny new VP of client strategy with the personality of a LinkedIn post and the foresight of a vending machine, had just walked into the Monday pipeline sink with his usual big week ahead pep. He was still riding high from being included in last week's press release. His parents had shared it on Facebook like he'd won a Nobel. What greeted him instead was a single-line email from Veldstrom's legal division, marked urgent. Per Clause 9.2d, we are exercising our right to dissolve the agreement. Please confirm transition plan. Kellen, who'd never read the clause, let alone understood why the client ever signed it, assumed it was a mistake, maybe a prank. He responded with a cheerful "let's hop on a call and talk through your concerns." Anton's assistant replied with a PDF. Attached was the original signed agreement, highlighted, time-stamped, and annotated in brutal German clarity. My name sat cleanly next to the clause. The language was unambiguous. Contract becomes null and void upon removal of Linda Rollins as project authority. No wiggle room, no appeals, just snap, like a loaded mousetrap. Kellen tried blustering, sent 3 emails in 15 minutes with escalating desperation. We'd love to discuss alternate leads going forward. I'm happy to fly to Stuttgart personally. Surely this doesn't reflect the spirit of our relationship. Each one was met with silence. Then a reply from Veldstrom's legal team: your leadership's failure to retain Linda Rollins has terminated our exclusivity agreement. Any continued contact should be routed through legal counsel. Kellen didn't know whether to scream or sob. Instead, he wandered into the COO's office like a man reporting a UFO sighting. And that's when the dominoes truly began to fall. Within the hour, the entire strategy team was in DEFCON 2 mode. Slack threads lit up like a Vegas strip, adhere tags flying, legal and finance pinged into panic threads, and at least one intern had to Google revocation of exclusivity clause just to keep up. A junior analyst, sweet kid named Marcy, who once asked if I was the lady who made Germany stop yelling at us, dug up the original filing and sent it to the acting counsel. She flagged something odd. The contract was linked through an external party, an LLC not listed under Quantivis Corporate Holdings. She hesitated, then picked up her phone and called me. It rang, twice. I watched it light up from my desk, where I sat barefoot, sipping from a chipped hotel mug that said meetings are just emails with snacks. And I let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. No message, she knew. By 10:30 a.m. Eastern, the CFO had called for a full pipeline audit. Legal confirmed what I already knew. Without me, Veldstrom's contract was unenforceable. Worse, unrecoverable. There was no clause to reinstate it. No patch. It was a one-shot mechanism, and Doug had shot himself in the foot twice. The board was pinged with a red banner alert. Emergency. Core client revenue threat. Urgent meeting 3 p.m. EST. I wasn't there to see it, of course. But someone forwarded me the internal agenda slide later. Topic: immediate impact of Veldstrom withdrawal on post-acquisition valuation presenter. CFO, pending statement from legal. No mention of Kellen. No mention of Doug. One name appeared in bold under the section titled Historical Signatory Authority. Linda Rollins. There it was. The invisible line they never bothered to trace back. The signature they dismissed as administrative. The woman they let go like old printer toner. No warning, no gratitude, just a click and a shrug. Now that signature was a scalpel, and their empire was bleeding out by lunchtime. I sat with that knowledge, not with glee, but with focus. This was always about more than one clause, one client, one CEO's ego. It was about architecture. The weight-bearing beams everyone forgets about until the roof collapses. Doug thought I was drywall. Turns out I was the damn support column. And the sound they were hearing in that boardroom wasn't panic. It was reality finally creaking loose. The boardroom at Quantivis headquarters wasn't built for panic. It was built for ego. 12 ergonomic chairs arranged around a matte black conference table, backlit company logo pulsing like a nightclub for billionaires, and a massive screen designed to make bar graphs feel like a max events. But by 3:07 p.m. EST, it might as well have been a war bunker. The CFO, Marty, poor bastard, was already sweating through his third slide. He hadn't shaved. He hadn't even fixed the formatting. His deck looked like it had been assembled mid-heart attack. Based on Veldstrom's immediate withdrawal and the triggered cascade of associated contracts, he said, voice shaking just enough to betray what the numbers couldn't sugarcoat, we are projecting a revenue loss of $180 million in Q3 alone. A few heads turned, not toward him, away from him. Like maybe not making eye contact would somehow delay the guillotine. Doug sat in the corner, trying to look thoughtful, but his neck was blotchy. He kept adjusting his cufflinks, like maybe if he looked busy enough, people would forget he was the one who set this whole fire with a single click on a Zoom call. Furthermore, Marty continued, the original valuation presented to our investors and acquisition partners assumed retention of 4 key enterprise clients. With Veldstrom gone, 2 others are in legal review to determine if their contracts were materially contingent upon that relationship. A pause, not a dramatic one, just long enough for reality to catch up. The head of investor relations spoke up slowly. Are you saying the entire $300 million valuation could collapse? Marty didn't answer with words. He just clicked the next slide. It was a big red number, minus 296,500,000, no pie chart. No bullet points. Just the raw subtraction from projected valuation if all 3 accounts dissolved or paused contracts pending review. Doug opened his mouth to speak, but someone beat him to it. Who, asked the only woman on the board, Regina, sharp as ever, drafted that clause? The room went still. Marty cleared his throat. Clause originated from a supplemental agreement filed during last year's renewal cycle. It was tied to Linda Rollins' consulting authority. Someone else muttered, Linda who? Regina didn't blink. Linda Rollins, the VP of Strategic Partnerships we let go last week. Correction, Doug let go last week. You could practically hear the air leave the room. Doug tried to salvage the moment with a tight little grin. Well, hindsight's 20/20, right? Obviously. He didn't expect, but Regina cut him off. No, Doug. Hindsight's 20/20 when the streetlight goes out. This was someone yanking the plug. Another board member, this one from the acquisition side, tapped his pen against the table like a countdown clock. So she left with the kill switch. And no one caught it? Marty shook his head. No one even looked for it. No one spoke after that. Somewhere in that silence, I imagined them flipping through org charts, trying to find a picture of the woman they'd quietly pushed aside. A name they used to drop when a client needed calming. A signature they'd built an empire on, until they decided it wasn't worth remembering. I wasn't in that room. I didn't need to be. I was still in Zurich. Same chipped mug. Same worn desk. Same soft jazz bleeding through the hotel hallway as I stared out the window at a sky that didn't care what Doug had done. And for the first time since this entire machine started spinning, I let myself feel it. Not revenge. Not yet, just the burn of recognition. The low, slow heat of justice inching up my spine like a second sun rising. Because they knew now, they finally knew. The acquisition wasn't safe. The future wasn't locked. And the only person who had ever held the map had just watched them drive off a cliff with the steering wheel in the trunk. Doug had replaced loyalty with volume, depth with noise, and now the echoes of his choices were bouncing off every damn wall. I didn't smile, but I didn't stop it either. Doug called at 11:18 p.m. Zurich time. Blocked number. Figures. I didn't answer. 2 minutes later, my lawyer did. Doug had opened with that same syrupy tone he used when trying to impress investors, over-enunciated, soft chuckle between words, like he thought charm came with a user manual. Hey, just wanted to reach out personally, he said. No hard feelings, of course. Obviously, this whole Veldstrom thing was unexpected, but I'm thinking let's fix this. Maybe a consulting retainer, bring you back on in a flexible role. You know, help stabilize the transition while we clean up the post-acquisition stuff. Everyone wins. My lawyer, God bless her, didn't even bother to pretend. She listened with the patience of a funeral director, then read the prepared line like a toll booth operator handing over a receipt. Linda Rollins' services are no longer required, she said, as your termination email made explicitly clear. Doug tried to laugh. Come on, don't be like that. That's the problem with men like Doug. They confuse civility for softness. Think the quiet ones fold easy. But I'd already given him his answer. Back on that Zoom call. 2 words, enjoy it. He just hadn't realized I meant every inch of what was coming. Look, he said, shifting gears, if we really want to go down this path, well, we can. But I have to mention that if this clause you filed was designed with malicious intent, it could be viewed as sabotage. Intentional damage. I don't want to involve litigation, but my legal team's reviewing their options. Oh, now we're threatening lawsuits? How quaint. My lawyer let him hang in the silence for a few delicious beats before responding. We welcome any review of the contract, she said. Linda's consulting authority was legal, disclosed, and filed in accordance with European compliance protocols. The clause was ratified by your own legal department. Your company had 14 months to amend or challenge it. You chose not to. He tried to pivot again, something about optics and rebuilding trust, like we were talking about a bad marketing campaign and not the total collapse of a $300 million fantasy he'd built out of borrowed money and LinkedIn hashtags. What Doug didn't understand, what he never understood, is that I hadn't broken anything. I just stopped holding it together. For 8 years, I'd been the one answering late-night emails from angry clients. The one rebuilding relationships after Doug's frat bro hires fumbled a rollout. One smoothing over budget holes, translating developer gobbledygook into boardroom English, handholding contracts across 3 time zones so the ink never smudged. I was the glue. He just never thought to ask what would happen if the glue let go. I didn't respond to Doug directly. I didn't need to. Every move from here on out was surgical. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was directing. And that distinction made all the difference. I didn't rage. I didn't plot from the shadows. I let him speak. Let him spiral. Let him dig. And while he spent the next 24 hours trying to claw back credibility in emergency Zooms and CYA email threads, I moved forward. I contacted Veldstrom's transition team and confirmed their timeline. I forwarded copies of the clause to 2 other enterprise clients quietly. I received a message from the chief legal officer of a certain rival firm requesting a confidential sit-down. I even got a handwritten card from Anton. You kept your promise, so did we? Doug wanted me back as a bandage, but I wasn't a patch. I was the damn architect, and now I was building something new. Without him, without Quantivis, not out of revenge, out of clarity. Because once you stop apologizing for your own value, the world gets very quiet. And like Doug, they don't know how to breathe in silence. The meeting took place in the kind of cafe where silence cost extra white marble tables, espresso served in shot glasses like it was contraband, and enough startup founders lingering around to start a blockchain cult. I didn't pick it for the ambience. I picked it because it was 5 blocks from the headquarters of a firm that had, for the last 4 years, quietly circled Quantivis like a hawk waiting for a limp. Nora Chen walked in 5 minutes early. Black slacks, flat shoes, hair like she cut it herself in a hotel bathroom. No nonsense. COO of Ravonix, a competitor in name only. In truth, they were leaner, meaner, and just as tired of Doug's bloated promises as I was. She slid into the seat opposite me, offered no handshake, no fake grin, just said, "Let me guess." He finally did it. I nodded, fired me, didn't read the clause. Watched $118 million walk out the door. She took her espresso and downed it like a shot. "What took you so long?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Not digital paper, hard copy. Not because I didn't trust the cloud, but because few things command respect these days like a fat manila envelope dropped on a polished table. Inside, a full client migration strategy. Not just Veldstrom, but 2 others circling the exit, including one sitting on a pilot deal for a data compliance tool we both knew was duct taped together by Quantivis's junior engineers. Each client listed with key dependencies, fracture points, proposed incentive timelines, contact authorization logs, side letters Doug never knew existed. Nora flipped through page after page, her eyebrows lifting once. Then again. Then she stopped at a diagram I'd labeled Succession Pathway's 3 phases of flight. "You didn't just leave," she murmured. "You planned the whole escape route." I leaned back. No one builds a parachute unless they expect the plane to catch fire. She tapped the folder. "You want a job? I want leverage," I said. "And I want a clean home for my clients." That's when she smiled, not warm, not predatory either. More like someone finally realizing they'd stumbled onto a gold vein beneath a landfill. "We've been looking at an acquisition," she said. "But maybe we just absorb what matters." Meanwhile, across town, Quantivis was on its second full day of spin control. Doug had called in every favor he had. PR had already drafted 3 non-statements about evolving client relationships. Kellen had stopped shaving. The head of HR was quietly circulating early retirement offers to anyone with senior in their title. And then the SEC pinged them, an inquiry into post-acquisition reporting inconsistencies. Specifically, misrepresentation of client revenue stability. Someone had filed a tip, not me. But I might have had coffee with the person who did. Because when you spend years keeping things standing, you know exactly who's watching for the cracks. In Quantivis, they'd been sending out glossy investor updates listing Veldstrom under confirmed 12-month renewals, despite the fact that the contract was conditional, now terminated. Oops. By the time their GC tried spinning it as a clerical misunderstanding, the SEC had already looped in an accounting review firm. And I was back at my hotel, unwrapping a pistachio croissant and watching it all unfold on private Slack threads passed from former colleagues who were still loyal to the person who made their jobs livable, me. Doug didn't know who was feeding the flames. He didn't know about Nora. He didn't know about the migration schedule already in soft launch. And he sure as hell didn't know I'd spent the last 6 months documenting every contract I touched under a compliance tracker tied to my LLC. He was playing whack-a-mole in a house filled with termites. I wasn't the target anymore. I was the torchbearer. And every time they scrambled to plug one leak, another opened. Because this wasn't sabotage. This was gravity, finally working the way it was supposed to. Doug still thought this was a rough patch. He hadn't realized yet the patch was the plan. The leak hit LinkedIn first. A short, almost clinical update posted by someone in M and a whisper circles, hearing chatter that Quantivis's acquisition may be under regulatory review. Sources cite client volatility and contract exposure. No names, no flames, just blood in the water. Then came the second post. This one from a mid-tier VC analyst with a fondness for doom threads. Confirmed, SEC review underway. Internal docs suggest valuation relied heavily on contracts tied to a single terminated exec. Heads will roll. It spread like gasoline on conference room carpet. Twitter, Slack threads. Finance bro group chats lighting up with emojis and screenshots of Quantivis's press release, now aging like unrefrigerated shrimp. Someone leaked the internal memo next. It wasn't supposed to get out, obviously. But things have a way of slipping when your entire mid-management tier is staring down performance clawbacks and an evaporating bonus pool. The subject line was brutal in its simplicity. Subject, updated risk exposure estimate, and below it, projected loss due to misclassified licensing dependencies, $308.4 M, not potential, not estimated, projected. That memo was sent at 9:43 a.m. By 10:20, Quantivis's share value, newly floated post-acquisition, was down 17%. By 10:45, the press had names. And by 11:10, Doug was sitting in the same matte black boardroom where he'd once bragged about streamlining legacy talent like it was spring cleaning. This time, he wasn't smiling. An emergency board session had been called. No catered breakfast. No color-coded slide decks. Just red folders, legal counsel, and enough nervous glancing to power a wind turbine. They didn't even start with pleasantries. Is it true, Regina asked from her seat at the end of the table, that Veldstrom was under an exclusivity clause tied to a personal LLC? Doug squirmed. It was, buried in supplemental documentation. It wasn't flagged during due diligence. Who signed it? She did. Who fired her? A pause. He did. There were no yelling matches. No thrown chairs. This wasn't Hollywood. It was worse. It was that bone-cold, quietly hostile energy that means the knives are out and already sharpened. Legal tried to buffer it. Said things like unforeseen complexity and retroactive audit trails. But the room had already turned. One board member, an older guy with a buzz cut and the attention span of a shark, leaned forward and asked the question that would echo for weeks. How do you fire the person holding the contract key and not know they were the contract? Doug's answer, whatever it was, never made it past the legal transcript, because by then his resignation was already being drafted. They gave him an out, stepping down to focus on personal projects. Classic PR junk food, but we all knew. He was being escorted out through the same glass doors he once told me needed more energetic people walking through them. Back in Zurich, my phone buzzed, nonstop. A screenshot from one of my old analysts, Doug, pale as drywall, sitting 3 chairs down from legal with his tie loose and his eyes blank. Caption, he just kept asking, what happened? I typed my reply without thinking, he did. Other messages poured in. People I hadn't heard from in years. Project manager in Chicago, an engineer in Lisbon, a procurement lead from Tokyo who once told me I was the only exec who ever remembered her birthday. Each message was the same in tone. You kept your grace, you played it clean, you never raised your voice, and now the silence was screaming. The press kept circling, but they didn't have my name. I wasn't in the articles, just a silhouette, a footnote. Terminated executive became its own legend. Didn't correct them, I didn't comment, because fire doesn't need to explain itself, it just burns. The voicemail came in at 2:12 a.m., no caller ID, just static for the first 3 seconds. Then his voice, low, stripped of its usual lacquer, the performative charm finally gone. I didn't know, Doug said, his breath catching on the words like they were foreign in his mouth. If I'd known. If someone had told me about that clause, he trailed off. Not into apology. Just silence. The kind of silence that screams all the things a man like him could never say out loud. I underestimated you. I thought you'd go quietly. I didn't think you'd matter this much once you were gone. I listened once, all the way through. Then I deleted it. There was nothing left to say. His story ended the moment he hit remove from org chart. Mine had only just crossed the title screen. I opened my laptop and sent a single message to Anton at Veldstrom. Appreciate your integrity. We move forward Monday. No fanfare, no victory lap, just business. The kind that lasts. Within the hour, the ink was drying on my contract with Ravonics. Nora didn't just want me, she wanted my map, my migration protocols, my client relationships, and most of all, my calm. Kind of calm that turns a flame into a furnace without ever raising its voice. Full authority, the contract read. Client retention bonus embedded. Equity to vest quarterly. There were no balloons, no champagne flutes. Just a handshake and a line at the bottom that said, in effect, we know what you're worth. By noon, 3 enterprise clients had already begun onboarding under my lead. Veldstrom had assigned me a direct liaison and fast-tracked a 2-year expansion plan. The same contracts Quantivis had gambled on, ignored, then fumbled were now mine to steer, freely, cleanly, and without Doug's dead weight dragging behind. I packed light. Just one bag, one laptop, and a new badge clipped to my coat. Linda Rollins, Executive Director. Strategic integration. The plane lifted off just after sunrise, Zurich falling away beneath the wing like a fading memory. Through the window, I watched the skyline shrink. The same city where Doug toasted his legacy. The same city where I quietly, methodically dismantled the illusion he built on borrowed brilliance. He thought he'd taken something from me, but you can't take what was never yours. All he did was unlock a door I'd already built a map through. The acquisition wasn't stolen. It wasn't sabotaged. It was simply undone. And now, so was I. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.